Hi everyone, welcome to Fall Landscape Care for Colorado Springs. My name is Catherine Moravec and I work as a Senior Water Conservation Specialist with Colorado Springs Utilities. So let's get right into it. You know, fall can be such a beautiful time of year for landscapes here in the Pikes Peak region. But before you know it, we are going to have our first fall frost and we will be heading into our winter season. So what I want to do in this webinar is help you prepare your landscape to go into dormancy in the fall, sustain itself for the winter, and come back in the spring in a healthy and beautiful state. So I'm going to be covering 4 areas that are key to sustaining your landscape in the winter months. So first I'll be covering watering and your sprinkler system. I will then move on to fall lawn care guidelines. Then I'll talk to you about fall plant care, including which plants to cut back and which to leave standing. And then I'll share with you a few final general tips to set you up to be successful with your landscape. So let's start off with fall watering and your sprinkler system. The first step is to continue to water consistently in the fall. Your landscape plants and your lawns still need water. So even though you might not have your landscape top of mind in the fall, your plants still need your care. So make sure that you water consistently because we can have long periods of warm, dry weather that actually drives water use. And you don't want your plants to go into winter in a dehydrated state. So by watering consistently, you can make sure that they're ready to go into dormancy in a strong and healthy condition. Now, as the weather cools down, it's perfectly fine to water less often or fewer days per week, but make sure that on your watering day, you're still watering the same amount of time so that you're really wetting the root system of your plants and your lawn and making sure that they'll remain healthy. So as we go into September, if you have been watering your lawn 3 days per week in the midsummer months, you can certainly drop that to 2 days per week as the weather starts to cool down. If it's really hot and dry, then you might want to keep it at 3 days per week until we start to get some cooler temperatures. And even as we move into October, you might be able to water once per week right before you turn off your sprinkler system in the fall. Now, if you'd like to take the guesswork out of watering and how often to water and how many days per week, consider getting a smart controller to run your sprinkler system for you. Be sure to choose a WaterSense certified smart controller so that will have the WaterSense brand on it and logo. Because those are the smart controllers that are proven to be effective. Now, the smart controller will actually take control of your sprinkler system and run it more often during hot, dry weather and run it less often during cool, cloudier periods because it's really targeting the amount of water that your plants actually need. Colorado Springs Utilities offers a very generous rebate for smart controllers. We will offer you a rebate for half of the purchase price up to $200 if you purchase a WaterSense certified smart controller. And you can find out more information about that rebate at csu.org. This is a fantastic way if you want to think about other things to really take the guesswork out of watering. Now, most people will winterize their sprinkler system sometime in October. So by winterizing, what I mean is you usually hire a landscape professional or an irrigation professional to come out to your property and use compressed air to blow all the remaining water out of your irrigation pipes and components. This is a really good practice because it prevents freeze damage from causing problems in your sprinkler system. So if you go ahead and winterize your sprinkler system in October, then typically people don't experience any freeze damage and then they can start up their sprinklers in the spring without any major concerns. Now, just because we're shutting down our sprinkler systems doesn't mean that our trees and our lawns and our landscape plants don't need water. In the Pikes Peak region, we can often have periods of warm, dry weather, even in December and January and February in our winter months. And if our plants dry out too much, then they can experience what's called winter kill. Winter kill is just actually dehydration injury for plants dying because they actually ran out of moisture to sustain themselves. So winter watering is the key to preventing winter kill. Winter kill will often show up in lawns as big brown spots that never green up in the spring. So let me share with you some guidelines about how to winter water. So I would recommend that you check 1 to 2 times per month if we've had an extended dry spell from November all the way to mid-April when people turn on their sprinkler systems again. Choose a day where the temperature is over 40 degrees and there's no snow or ice on your lawn or landscape. Put out a few soup cans in the area that you plan to water, grab a hose end sprinkler and a hose, and water that area long enough so that you collect on average about a ½ inch deep of water in those containers. And by doing that, you will have watered enough to rehydrate your lawn and landscape plants and sustain them through those dry spells. After you're done winter watering, disconnect your hose from the spigot to prevent any freeze damage from occurring. So now you may be asking, what types of plants do you need to winter water? Well, if you have to prioritize, make sure that you winter water any plants that you installed over the previous summer first, because they have the least ability to stay well hydrated and sustain themselves. Once you've watered your newly planted plants, then water the drip line of your trees and any lawn areas that are susceptible to drying out. Be sure to focus on south-facing sunny slopes because those areas are the most susceptible to drying out over the winter. Now, your existing plants like shrubs and ornamental grasses and perennial flowers can also benefit from winter watering during dry spells. But if you have to just limit your winter watering, focus on the newly planted plants, your trees, and your lawn areas first. Do be aware that winter watering may impact your wastewater charge for the year. So Colorado Springs Utilities calculates your wastewater charge by measuring your water use from December 1st through February 28th. So if you winter water during that period, it may elevate your wastewater charge for the year, although the impact is likely to be small. So if you are concerned about that, one strategy is to minimize your winter watering during that time or skip it altogether unless we have a very serious extended hot and dry period. So now that we've talked about watering in your sprinkler system, let's move on to fall lawn care. Most people think of caring for their lawn in the spring as things are starting to green up. But fertilizing in the fall is a really important practice to sustain the health of your lawn over the winter period. So in Colorado Springs, we recommend fertilizing around 3 holidays, once in the spring and twice in the fall. So you can use these holidays as reminders to fertilize your lawn. So they include Mother's Day, Labor Day, and right before you turn off your sprinklers in the fall around Halloween. By spreading out your fertilization throughout the growing season and fertilizing in fall, you can really keep those nutrients available for your lawn to use and help it become green and healthy throughout the growing season. It's perfectly fine to use any type of lawn fertilizer, but skip the weed and feed. So in the fall, you can choose to use a winterizer fertilizer, or you can just use a typical lawn fertilizer. It doesn't matter if it's a traditional product or a natural or organic product, any one will work. But when you're at the store selecting a lawn fertilizer, avoid the ones that have weed and feed chemicals added into it. This is because any nearby trees and shrubs that are rooted into your lawn will take up that weed and feed product, and it may negatively impact them over time. So instead, spot spray your weeds and just fertilize your lawn with straight lawn fertilizer. Another important practice is to core aerate high traffic lawns in September. Core aeration is done by a machine that drives over the surface of the lawn and pulls out plugs of soil and deposits them on the surface. The benefit to core aerating is that it breaks up any soil compaction in your lawn areas and allows air and water to move deeply into the soil. This will create a healthy root system and therefore a healthy lawn. So the key to core aeration is to do it during peak growth so that your lawn can recover quickly. So the ideal times to core aerate your lawn in the Pikes Peak region are September or in spring from mid-April through May. Many people will core aerate in the spring, and if you've done that, then that may be enough for the year, especially if you don't have a lot of traffic on your lawn. But if you didn't core aerate in the spring or you have a lot of traffic on your lawn, then core aerating in September can also be a really good practice. Many of us have shade trees that drop a lot of leaves on our lawn, and we can spend hours raking them and bagging them and figuring out where to dispose of them. What I'd like to recommend to you is, rather than bagging your leaves, consider using your mower to mulch them to prevent weeds in your lawn in the spring. So how you do this is you use your typical mower, just remove the leaf clippings bag and close the chutes so your lawn is mulching everything that it's driving over. You can mow over layers of leaves up to 6 inches thick, and your mower blade will chop those leaves into little tiny bits that will fall to the soil surface. This sort of acts like a mini mulch that can not only recycle nutrients into your soil, but it can also prevent new weed seeds from germinating in your lawn. So if you have areas that tend to get a lot of weeds in your lawn, maybe consider mulching your leaves with your mower, and maybe you can reduce the amount of weeds that you get the following year. Oftentimes people will mow their lawn really short in the fall for the winter. I'd like to suggest to, instead of mowing it short, leave your grass 4 to 5 inches tall in the fall after your last mowing. The reason why this is a good idea is because the longer you leave your blades, the less likely your soil will be exposed for erosion and new weeds to come in and invade, but also because the longer your leaf blades are, the more leaf surface area you have to photosynthesize and feed your lawn over the winter time. So by allowing your lawn to feed itself better, then your lawn will be stronger in the spring and will green up beautifully. So if you're going to cut your lawn short, do it in the spring right before it greens up, and don't do it in the fall. Now that I've covered fall lawn care, let's move on to plant care, including how you cut back plants in the fall and which ones to cut back. In the fall, it's important to nurture your plants into dormancy. So here in Colorado Springs, we do need to water our plants and take care of them so that they're set up to go into dormancy in a really healthy state. So let me give you some tips in order to do that. So let's start with trees and shrubs. Here are a few tips for you. First of all, don't fertilize them in the fall. When you fertilize, it'll often cause the plant to push new growth, and new growth is not really beneficial in the fall. We want to push new growth in the spring. So make sure that you save your fertilization for spring and summer months and avoid fertilizing your trees and shrubs in the fall. Also, if you're going to do any major pruning, save that for spring as well. Sometimes pruning can stimulate new buds to grow, and we don't want that to occur in the fall. We want the plant to go into dormancy in a gradual state. Now, if you have some pruning that you need to take care of, then you can certainly remove up to 10% of live branches in the fall, but just make sure you're not going over that limit, because you don't want to cause the plant to react in an undesirable way in the fall. If you do have dead branches on your trees or shrubs, that's a totally different story. You don't have to adhere to the 10% rule. You can take out dead branches at any time of year. In the Pikes Peak area, we often have male deer that like to rub their antlers in the fall. And what better place to rub them than on your newly planted tree trunk? So it's important to protect your trees from antler rubbing so you don't get large pruning wounds that are difficult for your trees to heal over time. The way we do this at the Waterwise Demonstration Garden is we use corrugated drainage pipe, and we cut a slit in that pipe from one end all the way to the other. And we use that slit to bend the pipe open and place it around the trunk of the tree that we'd like to protect. This works really well. We install it on all of our flexible or smaller tree trunks, and it does a great job of preventing deer from rubbing their antlers on it. If you use this corrugated pipe on your trees, then I would leave it on all winter and remove it in early spring, say February or March. If you've planted new trees recently, you may be thinking about whether or not you need to wrap the trunk with paper, tree wrap. Recent research has shown that that's not very effective at preventing freeze damage in the trunk, so tree wrap is really not recommended anymore, and you can use that time and energy for other fall landscape tasks. Most people in the Pikes Peak region will cut back their ornamental grasses in February. Ornamental grasses can be so beautiful in the fall and winter months because they add color and texture and interest, and they've really hit their peak growth. So most people will leave them standing for the winter to take advantage of those characteristics. What we usually do is we cut their ornamental grasses to ground level in February before the new growth emerges. And if you're interested in our recommendations on how to do this, please refer to our spring landscape cleanup webinar where we cover this in great detail. Now, because the plant has gone dormant, you can go ahead and cut it back in the fall if you really choose to do so. You just miss out on the aesthetics of those ornamental grasses for the winter months, but it won't negatively impact the plant health if you decide to cut it back. If you have ground covers in your landscape, you may need to rake those and get any leaves that are covering the ground covers off of them, or you can use a leaf vacuum. And this is just a good way to remove any debris that might be covering your ground covers too much. A leaf vacuum is just simply a leaf blower that has had the mower reversed, and it sucks up leaves and chops them into little bits and then deposits them in a bag that's attached to the leaf vacuum. So that can be a really good way to clean up piles of leaves that have collected on ground covers and also other areas of your landscape. Now, what should you do with your perennial flowers? Well, this is where we started to get into really your personal choice. Perennial flowers are those flowers that will grow in the spring and produce new leaves and stems. Then they start to go dormant in the fall, and those leaves and stems will die off and turn brown. Now, in areas of the country that receive more rainfall or are more humid, it's common practice to cut back all your perennial flowers in the fall to prevent insect or disease issues the following spring. But here in Colorado, our relative humidity is so low and we have such dry winter conditions that that's not really a concern for us. So you get the choice of whether you want to cut your perennial flowers back in the fall just for aesthetic reasons, or if you want to leave them standing and take care of them in the spring. So let me share with you how we go about this at the Waterwise demonstration garden. They're kind of a group of perennial flowers that we leave standing because they look really attractive. So they might have beautiful seed heads like the yarrow in the photograph, and you can see how beautiful those are when they catch the light and they capture snow during the winter. Or maybe you have a perennial flower that has beautiful architectural leaves and stems that have a nice shape. Those you can leave standing as well. Sometimes the way the leaves dry down will create a beautiful color that adds a nice highlight to your landscape. Those you can leave in place as well. And sometimes perennial flowers tend to be sort of evergreen. So even though some of the stems might be brown or have spent flowers, the base of the plant can be green for long periods of time in the winter months, and those you might choose to leave standing as well. So here are some of the species that we actually leave standing over the winter. It would include black-eyed Susan, like what you see in the photograph. Those beautiful dark seed heads not only create a gorgeous contrast with the snow, but they're an important food source for birds. Likewise, coneflower is one that we leave standing for the winter. Penstemon sometimes will have spent flower stalks that need to be removed, but the base of the plant is still green and beautiful. Agastache or sunset hyssop is another one that we leave standing for the winter, and yarrow would be in that group as well. Now there's a group of perennial flowers that does not look good during winter months, and these can be plants that might have experienced insect damage over the summer, or they just are bare stems with no interest anymore. They might be floppy by the end of the summer or crushed, or just in the way they grow, they really don't have any nice structure or winter interest. And it's perfectly fine to go ahead and cut plants back in the fall that meet these criteria. So the way we do it is we wait until the plants are fully dormant so that they've stored all the food they need for the winter. And this will usually happen, 1 to 2 weeks after our first fall frost. Once the leaves and stems are brown and crispy, then go ahead and cut them all the way back to ground level so they can green up nicely in the spring. Here are a few plants that we tend to cut back in the fall just because they don't look good anymore. This list includes blue salvia, daylily, which tends to turn to mush after the first fall frost, orange carpet hummingbird trumpet, and things like red valerian or Jupiter's beard. Those are plants that we typically cut back in the fall and welcome their new growth in the spring. Now sometimes you'll be working with a perennial flower and you'll notice that actually it's just the spent flower stalks that make the plant look unattractive. So this is a photograph of yellow pine leaf penstemon after it's done flowering in the fall, and you can see how it just doesn't really look that great. But if you cut back all of those spent flower stalks and leave the semi-evergreen leaves, it can be a really attractive plant for the fall period and often into the winter. So this is a case where if you go through your landscape, you might want to try cutting back the spent flowers first and see if that improves the appearance, and if not, then cut the whole entire plant back to ground level. But this is really where you get to choose, and your sense of beauty really can determine how you deal with the perennial flowers in your landscape. Now let's talk about subshrubs. Subshrubs are sort of a strange category of plants where over the winter the branches die part way back, but the lower parts of the branches remain alive and will leaf out the following spring. This can cause a lot of confusion, so I'd like to share with you a few tips on how to deal with subshrubs in your landscape. So subshrubs that are common in Colorado landscapes would include things like Russian sage, blue mist spirea, lavender, and even rabbit brush. Sometimes our perennial flowers that we categorize as perennials are actually subshrubs because the base of the plant tends to be evergreen and survive throughout the winter. So go ahead and treat a subshrub like a subshrub, and you decide which ones you have in your landscape. You can cut subshrubs back halfway in the fall if you'd like to do that. Just reduce the height of the stems by 1/2, and that'll get you in the ballpark for a good green up the following year. But many of these subshrubs have really attractive seed heads that look good throughout the winter. In this case, in the photograph, we have a picture of blue mist spirea, and you can see how beautiful those seed heads are when they capture the winter light. So if you want to leave them standing for the winter, it's perfectly fine to do that. At the Waterwise demonstration garden, we cut back most of our subshrubs in February and March rather than in the fall. And as I mentioned, it could be a little confusing about how to do this. Just use one of the 3 options I'm going to describe at this time. The first approach is to cut off 1/3 to 1/2 of the outer growth of the branches with hedgers. This is a really quick and easy and fast method that will remove most of the dead growth and leave most of the healthy parts of the stems in place to regrow that summer. So if you have a lot to deal with, or you just want to tackle the job and be done with it, use the hedgers and just cut off 1/3 to 1/2. The second option you can do if you have fewer subshrubs or you want to take a more customized approach is to use a pair of hand pruners and wait until the plant leaves out. Cut off the dead portion and leave the live portion of the stems, and that way you can create a beautifully shaped shrub that has exactly all of the old growth removed, that's dead, and it'll leave the live growth. So this is a good approach to use if you really want to be more strategic in your approach to subshrubs. The last method is a really good option if you have subshrubs that are starting to look sort of gangly and scruffy. Maybe the stems aren't greening up very well anymore. In that case, before you take out the plant, consider cutting all of the stems to ground level to see if you can rejuvenate it. I don't recommend doing this more than once every 3 to 5 years. And you would use a pruning saw or a pair of loppers to cut all those stems to ground level. Oftentimes what will happen is you'll get a whole new set of new, beautifully fresh stems emerging that will make your plant more symmetrical and more green and just really rejuvenated. So that can be a good approach to experiment with as well. That works well with subshrubs. If you have a specific type of plant that you'd like to learn how to take care of, you can find that information at waterwiseplants.org. This is the website for our online plant database, and there you can find specific plant care information for over 400 types of plants that grow in the Pikes Peak region. So you go to the website, you search for the plant, click on its profile, and then open up the maintenance section, and that will give you the specific steps to care for that plant for its best success. So now that I've covered which plants to cut back and how to do it, I want to share with you just a few final general tips to set your landscape up for success. The first question I often get is, can you plant in the fall? Yes, you can. It can be a great time to plant if you are willing to winter water. When you plant new plants, they have a smaller root system and they're more susceptible to drying out due to dehydration. So if you are going to plant, you have to be very consistent about winter watering so they don't dry out and die over the winter. If you are not sure that you can be consistent about winter watering, then I would suggest to skip the fall planting and do your planting in the spring when you're paying more attention to your landscape. But really, we've been successful at planting in September and October when we're consistent about winter watering. If you have annual flowers or vegetable garden debris, make sure you remove that and dispose of it as you're doing your fall cleanup. Sometimes people will wait until a hard frost and then dispose of everything, but this is an important step so you don't harbor any insect or disease issues into the following year. Another task that's a really good thing to do is top off any plant bed areas with wood mulch. So by bringing your wood mulch layer up to 3 to 4 inches deep, you're going to stabilize your soil temperature and your soil moisture and insulate your plants in order to help them survive throughout the winter months. So do any fall cutbacks that you're planning to do, and then add enough mulch on top of your existing mulch to bring the layer to 3 to 4 inches deep. And that is ideal for the Pikes Peak region. If you have any remaining weeds, make sure you pull them, mow them, trim them, or remove them before winter sets in. By tackling any remaining weeds, you reduce the number of seeds that are dispersed throughout your landscape, and that will reduce the amount of time that you need to spend weeding the following year. Sometimes people have kind of persistent perennial weeds in their landscape, things like bindweed or Canada thistle, and fall can be a really good time to deal with these weeds if you're considering spraying them with an herbicide. The reason for this is because these perennial weeds regrow year after year from energy stored in the roots. And in the fall, they're moving all of this food that they're going to store over the winter into their root system. So if you treat the leaves, then it's very likely that that substance will be moved into the root system and give you a complete kill on those troublesome weeds. So if you're considering doing that, I would certainly reach out to our local extension office and get some solid guidance about what to use for the specific weed that you're dealing with. But it can be a great way to deal with those weeds once and for all. In this webinar, I've covered some watering tips for fall, how to care for your sprinkler system, how to care for your lawn and your landscape plants, and some general tips to help you be successful with your landscape. I hope this has been helpful to you, and please be sure to check out Colorado Springs Utilities' WaterWise landscape resources at csu.org.